In the last session, we basically worked on, the definition which is given in UN Palermo Protocol, the European Union, Poland, Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 of the USA. So, and we understood the different parts of the definition through different models. That is the, basically we worked on the models of AMP, that is how we described it, through action, means, and purpose for which the trafficking is done. And the two models which were used is the origin, transit, destination model, and the then recruitment, transfer, and possession models. That describes the geographical perspective as well as the action involved in trafficking. So this is what we dealt. And we also talked about the vulnerability, the factors which caused vulnerability, like socio-cultural, economic, political, ecological context. So this is what was what we discussed last week. And we try to give example of the case. We talked about the case studies of the situation existing in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, to make it more interesting and meaningful. So today, just carrying forward what we did last time. So I will just go through how these the cause factors normally impact. So one is the push factors which are very personal and structural factors at the place of origin, which makes the person vulnerable. So we have already talked about these causal factors, which were socio-economic, political, ecological factors. So here they are more internal, reflecting what are prevailing at the place where they live. So naturally, when we talk about push factors, so it is more or less about, I would say, that what happens at the place of origin. So it is the place where the recruitment happens. So that is what the push factors are. And push factors normally also for international trafficking, that is the cause why people migrate, the illegal migration, which makes them more vulnerable. So these are the push factors. And some of the 5 factors beside the social, the factors that we had discussed, which contribute in recruitment, that is at the place of origin, is government corruption, high infant mortality, very young population, and if there's a lot of poverty or food protection is not there, sometimes the famines, sometimes the flood, or if there is some conflict and social unrest. So these all add on to creating vulnerability. And we say that we call it, there are 3 A's which contribute into push factors. And these 3 A's are alienation, which is alienation of a person. Wherever they are living, they are not very much comfortable with their surroundings. And when it is clubbed with aspiration and ambition. So when a person gets very aspirant, his aspiration increases and his ambition increases, then they look for some better things, for a greener pasture outside. And they presume that, these push factors, they can get rid of it, that which is contributing to depolarization. When they go to the other place, then it will result into depolarization, de-stratification, de-victimization, and eventually lead to empowerment. So this is what normally is portrayed, and this is illusionary factors which the victims think that is going to mitigate the ills there at the place of origin. So now when we come to pull factors, so pull factors again, they are those factors which allure the victims, which tempts them to move, which attracts the victims. These also fans the aspiration and ambition of the victims. So pull factors basically are at the destination point, and they promise a better life to the vulnerables or the victims. And these are a lot governed by demand factors. So this factors capitalizes on the vulnerability of the victims at the place of origin and creates a false promise to them, saying that if they move, then they are going, if they dislocate from their place, then certainly things are going to improve at the point of destination. And the pull factors international trafficking, which provides opportunities, are like, when there is ease in crossing the border linked with government corruption. When the male population older than 60, they move out. They think that when they move out, then the corruption would be less in that country. There is more food availability, jobs availability, and whatever the energy they have, that is going to be consumed more. They will be more meaningful to the society. And even like, many families think that their family would be, there would be less infant mortality. So anything which they think at the point of destination is going to help them. So these are the reasons why people even, migrate. So a simple example is like in Soviet Union. So after the collapse of Soviet Union, trafficking within Europe greatly increased. And furthermore, when there was expansion of European Union, this trafficking also again increased because there was a lot of porous borders, in fact, between the states. And that facilitated the movement across borders. And whenever they saw that the pull factors or the demand factors were more prominent in one state, in one country, the others moved to that place. So this has helped in European Union, in increasing the trafficking. The push and pull factors, normally, it cannot be very easily compartmentalized into watertight blocks, because these factors cannot be singled out, saying that, okay, if this is there, then only it will happen, or this causes vulnerability, or this is what promises. So it is basically lot many factors which would work together, complement together, confuses the victim, and then traps them into coming to the point of destination. So many experts call that as, they categorize it as a supply and within the supply and demand theory, that the demand is created here at the place of destination, which is the pull factors, and the supply is the push factors, which is increasing the vulnerability. So due to the vulnerability, the supply increases, and by false promises at the destination point, the demand increases, and the demand is created certainly by mixing of population and other things like urbanization, industrialization, more paying capacity, all other things like, it leads to demand for commercial and domestic labor, sex labor trade, entertainment, begging, etc. And that is how the situation is like, encouraging. So these are the demand factors. And human being a desirous creature, they don't much think about like if they should cross-check before moving. So it is just like, whatever they hear and they perceive that it's going to be a better life, so that is why they move out. So one thing, a very paradoxical thing that happens is, during the, as we say, the development and growth at the place of destination is reason for those pull factors, and reasons for vices like sex trade, forced labor, and everything. And at the same time, we say that in contradiction, that if this development and growth happens at the place of origin, then that can mitigate, and if it is inclusive, this development and growth is inclusive, then that is going to help. So this is how we talk about it. So let us understand, further understand the Palermo Protocol that we have already talked about, that what is the significance of Palermo Protocol. Palermo Protocol is very, it has been the reason for all this, the definitions and everything. So what is the significance? So it sets three broad goals, the Palermo Protocol. We are not talking about the definition, we are talking about the entire protocol, the entire document which has come out in 2000. So that, the three broad goals which have been set is to prevent and combat trafficking in persons, and paying particular attention to women and children. So, yeah. So, and then it also protects, assists the victims of such trafficking. So that is important, that there should be full respect should be given on the basis of the human rights. The human rights should be not violated of even the victims of the trafficking. So this is another goal that is set. and it also promotes the goal set is like, there should be a good cooperation between the state parties, so that whatever the objectives have been laid down in the Palermo Protocol is met. So this is what is expected, and the protocol has seen a lot of advances, particularly in 3 areas. So one is, it recognizes one thing, that it is not just women and children who can be trafficked, everyone can be trafficked. So this is what protocol has viewed. Despite this, all this, when we see the data, we will see that this is not very true. We have not been able to achieve it because the data speaks, it's a little bit biased, or I would say that it is more inclined towards women and children and biased or prejudiced towards males. So despite that, the protocol says that, other people also get trafficked. And it also talks about beyond sex work, because earlier it was thought only the sex work is what in which people were trafficked. It talks about the labor sector also. And it specifies that force, coercion, and deception must be present, which was absent. And because of absent of this force, coercion, and deception in the definition, so it was difficult to decide on what exactly constitutes trafficking. So, so the significance of this Palermo Protocol is, what basically the intention of the definition has been, that there should be, as we said earlier, there should be understanding, more coordination, convergence in national approaches, and particularly, when we are dealing with domestic criminal offense as well. And international cooperation is very important. And during the investigation also, there should be more cooperation between the states, and there should be a mechanism to protect the victims with full respect of their human rights. So human rights has been the core focus area here, and protecting the victims has also been has been too much of emphasized. It is not just the accused or offender oriented protocol or the document. It talks about the victim protection as well, so which is very important. It's a big shift from the earlier documents that we have. And it also requires criminalizing trafficking in persons. So this is what one thing happened. After that, many countries started coming out with trafficking laws. And if you see, even after 20 years, when they're coming out with the definition of trafficking, many of the countries, or even after a decade when more things happened, so that the definition was exactly the same which was picked of the Palermo Protocol definition. It also talks about the assistance and protection to victims. And as we said, there is a provision that there should be proper mechanism laid down for repatriation of the victims. So when it is cross-border trafficking, the biggest challenge that a country faces is how to repatriate the person back. So that is one thing. And the migration has to be somehow controlled, and particularly the illegal immigration which happens, and migration within the state borders, and training and research and everything should be done more and more, so that we understand what is the pattern of human trafficking, in which area the trafficking is happening more, and how to control that. So everything can be done only if we have enough research and people are trained in that. So it has to be evidence-based policy making. So this is that we talked about the Palermo Protocol, and now we can, what are the gaps in Palermo Protocol? That is again one of the, we have to understand. It is not that it is a, whatever is written is complete. That is good enough. There are some gaps which needs to be bridged or which needs to be plugged. And the biggest gap is that it talks more about the transnational trafficking. And that was what the situation was. During those days, not much was understood about domestic trafficking. It was felt that the trafficking happens, most of the trafficking is cross-border trafficking. The developed countries are place of destination. The poor countries are the places from where the people are recruited and they are moved out. So that is why the more focus went on transnational, trafficking. So this is one of the flaws in the protocol document. And there is another, important thing. The biggest flaw in the trafficking definition is that it emphasizes a lot on transfer and transportation, that the transit part. This thing here we have to understand the transfer and transportation is not easy. It is very difficult. So, that is one thing. And then the purpose also, as we said, is not, I think, it's been very, very generalized term that we have used. So similarly, that TVPA, the Importance of Trafficking Victims Protection Act is, is that the TVPA, if there is no compliance of the minimum standards of TVPA, then USA has a system in place where they rank the, the countries as tier 1, tier 2, tier 2 watch list, and tier 3. As I said earlier, Poland, India are in tier 2. So if some country is placed in tier 3, then the sanctions can be ordered against that country by President of America. That is one important part which has been put in TVPA. So that is why it becomes very important. No country wants that the US government puts a sanction. So it is better that they comply to it, and that is one of the reasons a lot of action has been taken because of the monitoring which is being created by Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And in the sanctions, they have even put a word where they have mentioned where the president can ask their representatives in the financial institutions, international institutions like IMF, World Bank, and all places that funds should not be granted. Developmental funds, other than the humanitarian and trade-related funds, other funds can be stopped. So these the sanctions which can be put on the country is the reason why TVPA is very, very important. So now let us come to what is the global estimate of the victims. So the global estimate, as you see, that 40 million people were victims of modern slavery as per the 2017 report of ILO. 40 million is a huge number. And in last 5 years, since the report came 2017 and before that, so there are 89 million people who have been trafficked. One interesting thing which we need to know here is that as per the 2012 report of ILO, only 29 million, not exactly 20, only means 29 million was what was expected or what was the estimate. And now they say 40. So 2012 to 2017, I mean, in 5 years, it has moved from 29 million to 40 million. So you can just understand either the trafficking has grown phenomenally or otherwise somehow the way we collect the data has not been appropriate. So of this 25 million people, of this 40 million have been into forced labor. So 25 million comes to around 60 odd percentage. So 60 odd percentages are people into forced labor. And 15 million have been into forced marriages, out of which 37%, that is 5.7 million, are the children. So you can see that a huge number of child are pushed into forced marriage. So again, going through the estimate of ILO, there were 5.4 victims of trafficking for every 1,000 persons. So if you see in population, so 5.4%, 5.4 persons are vulnerable out of 1,000 to be trafficked. And out of that, 5.9 are adults and 4.54 children are they are children. So women and girls constitute 71% of modern slavery victims. And women in sex trafficking, the victims, 99% of the victims are the women and girls. Similarly, I mean, if we see in the forced labor, where are they normally used? So how are they used? So one is the wages are not given, or they have been threat that the payments won't be given. So they keep on staying, expecting that the payment will be paid to them sometime. And there is a threat of violence, physical violence, and even sometimes there is threat to their family members. So that is how they try to hold on victims in forced labor. So there is again a UNODC report, a global report, which says that every 10 victims detected globally who are trafficked, 5 are adult women and 2 are girls. That means 70 plus odd percentage of the victims are either women and girls. And even in the ILO report, it said 71%. So it is a closed report. And similarly, 1/3 of the victims are children. So 19% girls and 15% boys. So you can see that a huge number of boys are victimized. and 20% of these victims are adult males. So that is one interesting thing we have to understand, that a report says that 20% of victims are adult males, and males are also trafficked. So similarly, when we talk about the migrants, we can see that a huge number of victims in many of the countries are the migrants, not the domestic trafficking. So in Western and Southern Europe, 65% of the trafficked victims are migrants. They're coming from outside. The outsiders are exploited rather than domestic people being exploited. So that is why the data which has been given by UNODC. And in North America, it is 25%, which means that there is a huge percentage of even the domestic people who are being trafficked nowadays. So the overall data is 50% detected victims for sexual exploitation, 38% are for forced labor, and 6% are subjected to forced criminal activity, means they can be forced into drug peddling or any type of crimes, and 1% is for begging, and there are small percentage for other things. This is what is important here to understand, because if here we say that 50% are for traffic for sexual exploitation, earlier reports in 2008 it was TIP said that 80% of the victims were exploited for sex trafficking. So huge shift from 80% for sex trafficking. They have started realizing that people are exploited even for forced labor. It is not just the sex trafficking where the victims are exploited. So they say that where they are engaged, that is for domestic. When it comes to forced labor in economic sectors, it's for domestic work, construction, fishing, agriculture, catering, and these are indicative. It is not an exhaustive list which is given. There may be many more fields in which they are exploited. So coming back, to why do we say that the estimates which we receive is not, complete? It is again a flawed estimate. So why do we say that? Because there is no uniformity in tools. Otherwise, you could have seen that earlier report says within 5 years from 29 to 40, we cannot have that jump, phenomenal jump. So certainly the tools used is evolving. It is not exactly what would give a total clear picture. And we can see that even in the projections of the ILO and UNODC, there have been some mismatch, because the ILO has taken sex trafficking for sexual exploitation within the ambit of forced labor, and UNODC has more focused on sex trafficking than labor. So the tools used are a little different, and there are a lot many hidden victims, particularly in poor countries, who do not come forward, and the concept is normalized. The victim doesn't know that they have been victimized. So because of all these reasons, they don't come out. So the data won't come out at all. And lot many dimensions, as we talk about adoption trafficking or trafficking in medical trafficking. So these things we don't know. So that is why perhaps it has not been discussed well. So these I have tried to put it in a very, very broad perspective, not getting into more details, not coming with a lot of examples. Just that whoever is here, I hope that if they understand this subject, then they can certainly go and talk about it, because this is one thing everyone should know. I say human trafficking is one thing which every citizen should know, and they can save a life. Yeah, thank you.